While most would end up giving up on Riverdale after its first or second season, I'm embarrassed to say that I watched all 7 seasons as a guilty pleasure. It's just a ridiculous cringe fest of enjoyment. Although I would also understand why you would stop watching it. It got really weird with the superpowers and the time travel and the devil showing up as a guest star occasionally. Although I would say one of the few more real characters of the series would be Toni Topaz, played by Vanessa Morgan. Probably helped by her being one of the few characters not to get superpowers or get turned into a witch. Her storylines also feel the most realistic of them all. Not necessarily really realistic, but in comparison, more realistic. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a huge Archie Comics reader. I'm trying to explore more of my comic books outside the big two, and for the last few weeks, I've been reading some of these more fun-type comics. Being a comedic series opposed to a more serious one that I typically do read, with its cast of characters of Archie, Jughead, Reggie, Betty, Veronica, Cheryl, Kevin, etc. However, one character I noticed from the series who wasn't really in most of these stories was Toni Topaz, so I was curious as to where the character came from, and I thought I would share it for those who are also curious. Since out of the 30-something issues I read, only 2 of them had Toni in them, and one of which was a cameo. Leading me to wonder where the character actually came from in the actual comics, because I know she does exist, because like said, she does show up. Toni would make her first appearance in Jughead Comics, an Archie Comics spin-off, one of many, with Toni debuting in issue 176 from 2012, where she'd be introduced as a rival for Jughead. But because of what Jughead is, and best at, she's a rival for him being like Jughead, liking food, not doing chores, burping. Just being a complete goofball, practically being the female equivalent of the character of Jughead. Although with a little more of a twist, and that is she's a tough girl opposed to Jughead being more of a soft boy. I hated saying that, but it's true. Finding this issue, by the way, was ridiculously hard, as well as just a simple chunk of the series. Later issues and early issues are easy to find online, in digital copies, but for some reason the middle area is just almost completely absent. And the only way I could actually read it was to pirate it. I'm sorry, but I did pirate it. Should I be admitting that in a video? Oh well, what are they gonna do? I'm not the one who uploaded it to the internet. But whoever did, thank you, because I actually got to read it, or else I wouldn't have actually gotten a chance to read this story in particular, or most Jughead stories for some reason. Does anybody know why that is, by the way? Why most Jughead stories are almost impossible to find digital copies of? There's actually a few stories in this issue, even a holiday one, which oddly doesn't make the cover. Instead, the Toni one does, called Cupcake Challenge, hence the cover of them eating cupcakes together. Toni is said to be this big bad girl, this tough lady that you don't want to mess with. But Jughead being Jughead of course does, and the two compete in an eating contest at a carnival. It's interrupted by Jughead's sister Jellybean going missing. Toni wants to win, but of course she isn't a bad person, so she of course helps Jughead find his sister. Which after they do, Toni and Jughead say their goodbyes, with Toni promising to beat him next time when they're going against each other in an eating contest. It's a fun, quick story that implies that there might be a romance between the two characters later on. But I have to say, the character being promised to be this tough girl, she really isn't. Which in itself might be the intention. I can't tell if it is or not, because we don't really get a lot of time with the character of Toni. But of what we do see that the character is a kind person and isn't actually a necessarily bad person as many people think she is. Or at the very least, not a bully like everybody thinks she is. The character's pink appearance might also be a joke, as she looks very girly, but in comparison to her actual personality is tough as nails. After this story, Toni wouldn't actually appear again in Jughead Comics before the series ended, but she would go on to appear in Archie Comics, joining the Betty's Band, an all-girl band of female characters from Archie Comics, of course being led by Betty. She still should have some interest in Jughead romantically, although nothing has ever come from it, at least not yet. She's still a recurring character in Archie Comics, being a tough girl in pink, but often just a background character or just a cameo. However, she has had lines here and there, too. She would also be a part of the South Side Serpents one-shot from 2021, which is of course because of the show's characterization of Toni. This comic kinda takes place both within and out of the Riverdale continuity. The show, that is, because it both doesn't fit the actual timeline, but it's also using the characterization of characters from the show, and clearly drawing them as if they were the actors from the show. So perhaps at one point it was intended to actually be a part of the show's continuity, but it has certainly led to it not being a part of it, due to many continuity errors within this one issue. Looking at you, FP. Toni overall is one of the more modern members of Archie Comics' supporting cast, although sometimes she can just be a glorified cameo or a background character, which is unfortunate because I really think the character could do more. Like actually maybe pair up with Jughead, like the initial intention with the character, or have the characters actually have a bit of a rivalry like she also was intentionally intended to have. She's also been praised as being one of the first bisexual characters of Archie Comics, but that's only in the Riverdale TV show. With it not being confirmed or not if the character is bisexual also in the comics themselves. However, considering the character's nature being a background character or just a cameo, it is very plausible that she simply is bisexual and we just haven't seen it. Since after all, we don't really know much about the character in the comics. One could even say she was really friendly to Betty, like overly friendly to Betty, to the point where one could say that perhaps she has a crush on her, although that also could just be me reading between the lines that don't exist. Which I often do, so the character might also not be bi in the comics, because, well, the character was introduced in the comics before the character appeared on the show, and the show is where the character was introduced as being bi. Which means it doesn't need to bleed back into the comics, but it wouldn't be a bad thing if it did. I like how I'm trying to make it seem like I'm not homophobic against bisexual people, when I myself am bisexual. But, you know, you always gotta cover all your bases. I think that the character Toni overall should be given more to do. Maybe not like a huge storyline or her own comic, but just like a few more lines. Maybe even give her just a small storyline between her and Jughead. Or just her by herself. I would also say the character coming out as bisexual could be a storyline, plausible for the character, but I also think that might be a bit too fast. You kind of gotta ease into that, because if the character comes out as bisexual when she's just a glorified cameo or a background character, I don't think it's really going to count as representation, or no one's really going to care. You kind of gotta ease into that area where the character is an actual character and a person that people actually care about, and that storyline could fit. That is if you want to do that storyline, you don't have to. You could just have the character being bisexual without her coming out as bisexual. Or maybe she's not even bisexual but straight, because the character's only bisexual in the show. Either way, I do hope the character gets a little more to do. Maybe not a huge storyline like said, but at least a few more lines, maybe even a line to her childhood or something there. Also, do you guys have any recommendations on more Archie comics? Because I do want to read more of them, but I've been mainly reading the more modern ones, but I want to get to more older ones, and I don't know where to start. Or just simply how to start, because I don't think that I need to read the very first Archie issue ever. But maybe I do, I don't know. That's why I'm asking for your advice. So please tell me what Archie comic I should read from the older eras or even modern eras. I would like to read more Archie comics in general. And that's it. Like always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!